Alright boys, I think I just found one of my new favorite characters in FGO. I mean, Zenobia is just a very strong, independent woman. She fought off the Romans as best as she could. She made this gigantic empire that was able to rival the Romans, and even in her greatest humiliation, she found some pride. And her NP signifies this by her breaking those gold chains, and let me just stop capping, we all know why I really like this servant. If you don't know, just go ahead and peep that 4th ascension. Ya girl has the dumpy, but in all reality, her lore does seem pretty interesting. I don't want anybody to be like, I can't believe he doesn't like the lore. I mean, okay, her lore seems really interesting, but it's definitely a huge plus that she's packing the dumpy, if you know what I'm saying. But she's also a very powerful servant in FGO and is actually the reason I'm going to be summoning on this banner. I originally, when I looked at Jacques de Femme over there, I was like, I mean, she's pretty good, but not really a servant that I think is worth summoning for, especially for me, someone who doesn't have Scotty. And then they were like, hey, you remember when you wanted Summer Anastasia to be that AoE arts archer? And I'm like, yeah, that's what I wanted. They're like, well, that's actually what Zenobia is going to be. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess I just have to hand my quartz to you on a silver platter then. Because Zenobia is actually rather good. The only fault that we'll get to at the very end is that her damage is a little low because her attack is not all that great. It's quite low. So if you're not getting her traits and having her hit those special damage mods, she can be a little lackluster when it comes to damage, but that's why we summon for NP5, boys. We just try to power whale our way through any of these problems. But if you enjoy FGO content, I upload these videos every single day, and all I ask for in return is a like on the video and a subscribe to the channel. We are on the road to 100k, and it's going to be a long, arduous, and some would say an impossible journey, but I think we can make it with the support of everybody in the community. So help your boy out. Let's make it to 100k. And if you really want, you can click that join button to become a channel member. I'm actually trying to think of what I should upload for channel members to make it worth it for someone to become a channel member. So I'm actually looking for ideas. If you want to comment down below something you think would be worth becoming a channel member for, whether it's getting access to some videos early or just exclusive content for members, like I'm thinking about just uploading like challenge quest videos and stuff along those lines. Or maybe I'll make polls for like certain characters or servants that people want to see me cover, but they don't really come around on Raid Up, or they're just not very popular. And maybe I'll just upload those for channel members, maybe something along those lines. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below, and make sure you actually think about it and like, this is something that I think is worth it, because I want it to be worth it. But with that being said, let's go ahead, and I know I say this in every video. I know I say, let's dive right into this servant, but this is probably the most true it has ever been in my entire life. If I could dive my entire existence into Zenobia, I would. And so that's exactly what I intend to do. We are going to dive right into this servant, starting off with her hits, of which her hits are actually pretty good. The base statistics aren't really all that high at 0.47% NP gain and 8.1% star gen. She doesn't really have anything in her passive skills to really help that out, aside from like a passive quick card buff. But the hits on her cards are all relatively high. We're talking 2 hits on 2 quick cards, 4 hits on 2 arts cards, and 5 hits on the extra attack. It just means that her hits are all relatively good as long as you're getting crits on everything. And spoiler alert, crits are the name of the game when it comes to Zenobia's gameplay style. So that is not going to be a problem for her at all. If you're hitting those quick and arts cards without crits, you're going to notice that they're kind of lackluster, and you may not be feeling the true power of said cards. But man, you start getting some crits and she's definitely going to pop off. Now, her low base statistics do mean the extra attack is not going to be the living meme that I want it to be, because the extra attack has a glaring weakness that even if you have big boy hits, you can't crit on it. So even if you have low base stats, you can only get so many hits on said extra attack to really buff it up, unless you use the append skill. I mean, in that case, go nuts with the extra attack. But with that being said, I really want to talk about her skills, because I think she's built in a really good way. So skill 1 is just the all-in-one super powerful offensive skill. It's giving her a 30% arts buff for 3 turns. Then she's getting a 20% NP refund every turn for 3 turns, and then she's refunding 10 stars every turn for 3 turns on a 7-turn cooldown. So you're actually at a loss when it comes to cooldown timing because the skill is up for 3 turns and down for 4, but I would say it is immensely worth it in this case, especially because this is a servant that you might want to actually pair with Tamamo to get those low cooldowns because, man, these skills are really powerful. And not only that, she doesn't have an NP damage buff, and Tamamo giving her an NP damage buff actually skyrockets her damage because then she's going to, at the end of the day, have a triple buff or even quadruple buff stack if you count her special damage mod. But this skill in and of itself, I mean, the arts buff being 30% for 3 turns means you're getting extra damage for all of your arts cards, but probably more importantly, you're also raising the NP gain of said arts card. So that lower than average natural NP gain rate is actually buffed up to being pretty average, especially if you combine critical hits with it. Then it's actually really insane because now you're buffing up the NP gain, getting crits on high hit arts cards, and it just makes her really insane. The 20% extra NP every single turn. Spoiler alert, she does not have a raw battery, but this is going to kind of help her farm and make up for her lacking damage. So let's say that because she doesn't have the best damage, you farm a wave and you only refund 80% of your max HP. Well, guess what? Now you're going to get an extra 20% at the end of that turn going into the next wave. So it really doesn't matter because you have your NP. Really, all you got to make sure you're doing is killing the enemies, which again can kind of be hard if you have lower damage. You might run into a Ryder Mordred issue where Ryder Mordred at like NP1 can kind of flop around a little bit, where she can gen her NP really well and even like refund 100% of her NP, but she might not kill the enemies because her damage is a little low at NP1. You might run into that issue, but that's kind of why I'm suggesting if you got Tamamo with your first or second free 5-star ticket, you might be well inclined to bring her in your team comps because, again, triple or quadruple stacking your buffs is going to massively buff up the amount of damage you're doing. Plus, you can afford to do it. I mean, worst case scenario, you just plug suit Tamamo out at the very beginning. You just dump buffs off, then plug suit out for your other Castoria. If you're doing a farming setup, it doesn't affect whatever CEs you're doing. The only negative thing is like you have to click a few extra buttons and maybe team cost, but I think it is well worth the investment, and the reward you get is just massive big chungus damage. And then finally, let's not forget that she's getting 10 stars every turn for 3 turns, which again, arts cards don't naturally gen stars. So for that reason, when you have an art servant, especially an arts crit servant, that can front their own stars for free, it is really broken. Again, you can get arts cards to gen stars and everything, even though they have a natural star gen value of 0. It's kind of the whole point of someone like Caskill, but it's not ideal. So when they can just do it with the skill, it is super powerful. Now moving on to her second skill, this is her survivability skill. It's giving her a guts that lasts for 3 turns. She's getting a little bit of decent star weight, nothing super insane at 500%. Usually like the insane star weights are like a couple thousand, right? Those are usually like outliers, but those are like you're guaranteed getting the stars with those servants. But this should guarantee, with her already natural high star weight of being an archer, that she's getting all the stars, which is very important because you want her to be critting to refund her NP. And also to just be kind of doing some big chungus damage, as we'll talk about later. Then she's also just dropping a free 20 stars for you to play around with, all on a 6-turn cooldown. So really, just treat this as Star Bomb. I get the stars, I absorb them all for myself, and I can use this as a decent survivability skill. She doesn't have any raw survivability like a dodge or an invincibility, but again, she's an art servant. You can pair her with Castoria and Tamamo. Tamamo has enemy NP control with her drain skill, and then Castoria gives you an AoE hit base solemn defense and then also gives you invincibility. So I think she'll be fine. If you're using her for solos, maybe you'll run into an issue. The guts should be fine if it's not too hard of a solo quest. But again, if you're pairing her with Castoria, and then especially Castoria Tamamo, you're going to be absolutely fine. Then finally, we have her third skill, which is her Charisma. And it's quite a weird Charisma. So it's giving everybody the 20% attack for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown, the regular Charisma that we all know and love. But then instead of some weird secondary effect of like crit damage or charging their NP or just anything along those lines, it's increasing the party's critical attack chance resistance by 30% for 3 turns, which is a neat little defensive ability that she has. But I'm not gonna lie, I would have just much rather she gave the entire party 30% crit damage for 3 turns, but maybe they just didn't want to have her step on the toes of Jacques the Femme over there because she's also doing that. But I would have much preferred she just got extra crit damage for the entire party and had it be a little more accessible because, spoiler alert, you'll notice that she's a crit servant but doesn't have any crit damage skills. That all comes from her NP. But before we get into that, you know, I just would have preferred if they put this on the skill, so that way she had crit damage she could get from her NP, but also had a more accessible version for that crit damage buff in her skill, so you could just click it, boom, get some crit damage on the field. And it'd be a party-wide buff as well, but I kind of see where they're going with this. Again, weird lore reasons for why it's like not really an offensive skill, but it's whatever at the end of the day. Let's talk about the NP. This is giving her an additional 10% attack buff that procs for her, so in reality, at base level, she has a 30% arts buff multiplying into a 30% attack buff because you have the 20% charisma plus the 10% on the NP, and those two multiply into the arts buff because different buff types multiply into each other. Same buff types add into each other. So that's really the only reason she's not doing absolute stinker damage. If she just had like a bunch of arts buffs, she would not be hitting hard at all because keep in mind, her attack is quite low. This is one of those servants that if you want to grail her, I fully support it. Not only is she super hot, but she could really use the extra attack. Then she's getting a free 150% extra special damage mod against enemies with the King attribute, which actually are a pretty decent amount of enemies. Not really like just random trash mobs, but when it comes to servants, there's a decent chunk of them that you could pull this servant out against. And her damage actually does skyrocket quite a bit when you're fighting somebody that has the King's attribute. God forbid you're fighting any of the Sabers or the Berserkers that have the King's attribute, they're getting obliterated, but it does mean you can bring her to some neutral fights and get some really decent damage out of her. Again, this is because all three of those buffs are multiplying into each other. Power mods multiply into card buffs that multiply into attack buffs that multiply into NP damage buffs, which is why I'm saying if you use Tamamo, whose first skill gives you a 30% NP damage buff, you can have a quadruple buff of like 330% values and one 150% value, and you can just go absolute ham taro with this servant and have yourself a lot of fun. But then eagle-eyed viewers will see her overcharge effect, and this is where the crit damage comes in. Because at baseline level, she's giving herself 50% crit damage for 3 turns, and that scales up to 100% crit damage. And that's kind of why I was saying I really wish they gave her the 30% on that skill, because then at baseline, she could have 80% after using her NP, and I think that would have made her really nutty and really good. Because having 50% isn't bad, it's just kind of standard, and because I kind of like the servant a lot, I really wanted her to stand out more and be like, oh my goodness, at baseline she's having 80% crit damage, that's insane. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you're gonna get her like NP5 and you're gonna use like some meme strats, like maybe use demonic bodhisattva or something on her, you can definitely get 100% crit damage up. Especially, again, I talk about this more when we're talking about buster servants, but there are more characters coming out that are supporting the overcharge niche. Like you're getting Morgan, and then you have Himiko coming out that are very top tier servants, and they just happen to also give other servants this overcharge buff. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get like a really powerful arts type servant that is also buffing overcharge. And when we do get someone like that, don't forget about our girl Zenobia over here. But with that being said, I think she's really good. If you're on JP, I could definitely recommend people summoning on this banner, because you have a very powerful quick foreigner over here, which is going to be just generally good in most content. And then you have a very strong arts AoE archer over here, who I don't think is going to loop quite as well as someone like John Archer, but she's going to be very, very close. And it's going to be like splitting hairs in most scenarios. In fact, I might make a video just comparing the two, because I think while Jean Archer might be able to loop a little bit better, I think Zenobia is just going to be a better crit archer than Jean Archer is going to be. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Let me know that in the comments down below. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I've been simping long enough for this servant, so you guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace late, guys.